Before we dive in, viewer discretion is advised. This content is for entertainment. What happens when one of Hollywood's last true movie stars, a man who spent 4 decades making films on his own terms, who's risked everything multiple times to tell stories he believed in, who survived massive failures and historic successes, without compromising his artistic vision, walks onto a late-night talk show, expecting to discuss his passion project, only to discover the host has prepared cheap jokes about his most painful professional moment. When someone who's earned legendary status through genuine artistic courage encounters a comedian who mistakes mockery for humor and cruelty for entertainment. When a conversation about film becomes an ambush about box office failures, budget overruns, and the audacity of believing in your vision, even when everyone says it's impossible, what you're about to witness is not just another celebrity losing their temper, not just another moment of late-night tension, not just another instance where a host crossed a line and paid the price. This is the moment Kevin Costner, the man who made Dances with Wolves when everyone said it would fail, who built Waterworld when everyone said he was crazy, who walked away from Yellowstone at the height of its success because he had something more important to create, reminded everyone that some artists don't make art for approval, that real filmmakers don't need validation from comedians who've never created anything that mattered, and that legends don't sit quietly while lesser talents mock their life's work. Jimmy Kimmel's show had been courting Kevin for months, tried to secure him for an appearance to promote Horizon, his ambitious multi-film Western saga that he'd spent years developing, mortgaged his property of finance, and poured his heart and soul into creating. At 69 years old, Kevin was betting everything on a vision that most of Hollywood thought was commercial suicide. A long-form Western epic released in installments, targeting an audience that supposedly didn't exist anymore, made with his own money because studios wouldn't take the risk. The booking had come together with the usual agreements. Focus on the film, discuss the creative vision, let Kevin explain why this project mattered enough to risk his entire fortune. His publicist had been explicit with Kimmel's producers. Kevin had endured decades of cheap shots about Waterworld, had heard every possible joke about Kevin's Gate, had been mocked for his ambition by people who'd never risked anything. This interview needed to respect the work and the courage it took to make it. But in Jimmy's pre-show production meeting, surrounded by his writers who'd spent the Trump years forgetting how to write anything except political jokes and celebrity takedowns, a different conversation was happening. Waterworld jokes always kill. One writer said, pulling up statistics on which it's got the most social media engagement. And this new movie is basically Waterworld on land. He's mortgaged everything. It's going to bomb. It's the same pattern. Jimmy had nodded along, perhaps sensing this was dangerous territory, but unable to resist the lure of easy laughs, viral moments, and the kind of mean-spirited comedy that his show had increasingly relied on as actual wit became rarer. We'll talk about the movie, he'd assured his producers. But we're also going to have some fun with his track record. That's what makes good television. What Jimmy called having fun, Kevin would soon recognize as the same lazy comedy that had been deployed against him for 30 years, reducing genuine artistic ambition to punchlines about failure, mistaking an artist's courage for hubris, treating someone's willingness to risk everything for their vision as material for mockery rather than a story worth celebrating. What Jimmy fundamentally failed to understand, what people who'd never created anything significant could never grasp, was that Kevin Costner had survived decades of this exact treatment and had emerged stronger each time, not by laughing along, but by remembering who he was and what mattered. He hadn't made Dances with Wolves to please critics who said Westerns were dead. He hadn't made Field of Dreams to satisfy executives who thought it was too weird. He hadn't kept working for 40 years by accepting other people's definitions of success or failure. This isn't about whether celebrities should expect jokes about their flops, whether public figures must tolerate being mocked, whether comedians have the right to make fun of anyone. This is about the difference between comedy that punches up and comedy that punches down, between jokes that reveal truth and jokes that simply wound, between humor that takes courage and humor that takes the easiest possible target, someone who dared to dream bigger than playing it safe. Jimmy Kimmel thought he was doing what late-night hosts do, making jokes about celebrities, getting laughs from situations that everyone recognized, creating moments that would be clipped and shared across social media. What he was actually doing was about to mock a man's life's work to his face, disrespect genuine artistic courage for cheap laughs, and discover that some people would rather walk off your show than laugh along with their own diminishment. And when Kevin Costner, who'd faced down every possible criticism, survived every disaster that Hollywood could throw at him, and emerged as one of the last artists who still made films because he believed in them rather than because algorithms said they'd work, finally had enough of Jimmy's particular brand of disrespect disguised as comedy. The result wasn't just good television. It was a reminder that some things matter more than playing nice for ratings, that artistic integrity isn't a punchline, and that the people who risk everything create something meaningful deserve better than mockery from people who risk nothing. Buckle up, because what you're about to witness isn't just an explosive walk-off. It's a moment when someone who'd spent 40 years proving doubters wrong finally said he was done proving anything to anyone, especially not to a late-night host who wouldn't understand artistic courage if it was explained to him in the form of pre-approved talking points. Jimmy Kimmel Live Studio carried its familiar late-evening energy, the audience settling in for another episode of the show that had once been essential viewing, but had gradually become just another source of predictable political jokes and celebrity content. Kevin Costner's booking had generated genuine excitement among the staff. This was a real movie star, someone whose name alone conjured actual cinema history, not just another actor promoting their latest streaming content. Kevin walked onto that set carrying himself with the same quiet confidence that had characterized his entire career. Not the desperate energy of someone chasing relevance, but the solid presence of someone who'd never confused fame with importance, success with meaning, or box office with artistic value. At 69, he looked like he'd earned every one of those years through actual living rather than just aging, his face showing character rather than just time, his demeanor suggesting someone comfortable in his own skin, because he'd never pretended to be anything else. Our next guest is a 2-time Academy Award winner, a director, a producer, and someone who's about to release one of the most ambitious film projects in recent memory, Jimmy announced. His introduction hitting all the expected notes. Please welcome Kevin Costner. The audience applauded warmly as Kevin made his way to the guest chair, shaking Jimmy's hand with professional courtesy, settling in with the ease of someone who'd done thousands of these interviews and understood exactly how the game was played. He was dressed in what could only be described as Kevin Costner casual jeans, boots, a well-worn jacket that suggested he'd come straight from set or ranch, looking like himself rather than a packaged version created for television. Kevin, thanks for being here, Jimmy began, and his tone was appropriately respectful, giving no indication yet of what was coming. Let's talk about Horizon. For films, nearly 3 hours each, shot back-to-back. That's insane. Kevin leaned forward slightly, his body language showing genuine enthusiasm for discussing something that clearly mattered deeply to him. It's a story that needed time to tell properly. These kind of narratives, these sprawling Western sagas about how America was really built, they can't be rushed into 2 hours. So, will you also mortgage your property to finance it? Jimmy interrupted. And there was something in his tone now, not quite mockery yet, but moving in that direction. That's a pretty big risk for a genre that most people say is dead. Westerns aren't dead, Kevin replied. And there was steel in his voice now, a line being drawn. Good stories are never dead. And yes, I put my own money in because I believe in it. That's what you do when you're making art you commit fully, or you don't make it at all. Jimmy nodded, but his expression suggested he was setting up something, preparing his audience for a punchline that Kevin hadn't agreed to. That's really admirable. Really? But Kevin, you've done this before, right? Bet everything on a big vision. Gone way over budget. I mean, Waterworld, basically. Stop right there, Kevin said, and his voice dropped lower. And anyone who'd watched his dramatic performances knew that when Kevin Costner got quiet, that's when you should pay closest attention. We're not doing this. The shift in atmosphere was immediate and stark. Jimmy's smile faltered, caught off guard by the directness of the response. I'm just saying there's a pattern. A pattern of me making the films I believe in regardless of what people like you think about them. Kevin interrupted, and the anger was unmistakable now, though still controlled. Is that the pattern you're referring to? The audience stirred uncomfortably, sensing this wasn't the playful back and forth that usually characterized late-night interviews. This was real tension, genuine conflict, and it was escalating quickly. Come on, Kevin. I'm just joking around. Jimmy tried, retreating to the comedian's defense. It was just a joke when a joke lands badly. No, you're not joking around, Kevin said flatly. You're doing what people have been doing to me for 30 years, reducing my willingness to take artistic risks to a punchline about failure. That's not humor, Jimmy. That's lazy comedy at the expense of someone who's actually created something. Jimmy laughed nervously, looking toward his audience for support, but they were silent watching, waiting to see where this was going. Look, I didn't mean any disrespect. Then what did you mean? Kevin asked, and his voice carried decades of dealing with exactly this kind of dismissal. You brought up Waterworld, which you know is something that's been used to mock me for decades. You brought up budget overruns, which is code for saying I'm irresponsible with money. You frame my commitment to my vision as some kind of foolish obsession. What part of that wasn't meant to be disrespectful? The cameras kept rolling, because what else could they do? This was live television, at its most unpredictable. And everyone in the control room knew they were witnessing something significant, not scripted tension or manufactured conflict, but genuine anger from someone who'd been pushed past their limit. You know what the difference is between artists and comedians? Kevin continued, not waiting for Jimmy to respond. Artists create something from nothing. We take risks. We put our money, our time, our reputations on the line to make something we believe in. And sometimes we fail spectacularly. But at least we try to make something meaningful. He gestured at Jimmy at the studio, at the whole apparatus of late-night television. You sit behind a desk and make jokes about people who actually do things. You don't risk anything. You don't create anything lasting. You just comment on the people who do. And when they fail, you mock them for having tried. Jimmy's face had gone from pale to red, clearly in use of being confronted this directly on his own show. That's not fair, isn't it? Kevin interrupted. Tell me, Jimmy, what have you created that will still matter in 20 years? What have you risked everything for? What work have you done that required genuine courage rather than just reading jokes that other people wrote for you? The silence that followed was devastating. Jimmy opened his mouth several times, but found no response that would make things worse. His writers in the control room were frantically typing suggestions, but nothing they wrote could salvage a situation that had exposed a fundamental truth that there's a vast gulf between people who create and people who comment on creation. Waterworld, Kevin said, his voice carrying the weight of 3 decades of defending that film cost $175 million and made $264 million worldwide. That's not a flop, Jimmy. That's a profit. But you know what made it easier to mock than to acknowledge? The narrative that I'd failed, that I'd been hubris personified, that I deserved be taken down a peg. He leaned forward, his intensity increasing. And you know what's funny? That film employed hundreds of people. It created technical innovations that are still used today. It entertained millions of people around the world. It exists. It's something I made that will outlive both of us. But sure, let's reduce it to a punchline about budget overruns, because that's easier than acknowledging that making a film that ambitious took guts that you'll never have. Jimmy tried to interject, to redirect, to somehow regain control of his own show. Kevin, I think you're taking this too personally. Too personally? Kevin's voice rose for the first time. You invited me here under the pretense of discussing my new work, and the first thing you did was mock my past work. How exactly should I take that? Should I laugh along while you disrespect the thing I've spent years creating? Should I play the good sport while you get easy laughs at my expense? He stood up then, and the decisiveness of the movement silenced any remaining attempts at damage control. I've spent 40 years in this business, making films that mattered to me. Some succeeded commercially, some didn't. But every single one of them was made with integrity, with commitment, with a genuine belief that stories matter and that taking risks is better than playing it safe. He began removing his microphone with practiced efficiency. And you know what I've learned in all that time? I've learned to spot people who are more interested in tearing others down than building anything themselves. People who mistake mockery for wit. People who think that making someone feel small somehow makes them big. What are you doing? Jimmy asked, genuine panic creeping into his voice as he realized this major booking was disintegrating in real time on live television. I'm leaving, Kevin said simply. I came here to talk about a film I believe in. Instead, I got cheap shots about past work from someone who's apparently never understood the difference between failing at something ambitious and succeeding at something safe. You can't just walk off, Jimmy started. But Kevin's laugh cut him off. Not a friendly laugh, but something bitter and final. Watch me, Kevin replied. You know what's amazing? You had one of the last real movie stars on your show. Someone who's actually lived an interesting life, who's taken real risks, who has stories worth telling, and you wasted it making Waterworld jokes that stopped being funny in 1998. He set his microphone on the chair with careful precision. Horizon is a film about people who risked everything to build something new, who face impossible odds because they believed in something bigger than themselves. I thought maybe that story would resonate with an audience. But clearly I miscalculated by coming here, because this show is about safe jokes and cheap shots, not about celebrating genuine ambition. Jimmy stood up too, perhaps thinking he could physically salvage the situation, or at least appear to still be in control. Kevin, come on. Don't be so sensitive. We're just having fun. That word, sensitive, Kevin said, turning back to face him directly. That's what people always say when they're called out for being cruel. Don't be so sensitive. It was just a joke. Lighten up, as if the problem is the person being hurt rather than the person doing the hurting. He moved toward the edge of the stage, his stride purposeful and unhurried. You want to know what real sensitivity is, Jimmy? Real sensitivity is understanding that when someone puts everything on the line for their art, mocking that commitment reveals more about you than about them. Real sensitivity is recognizing that not every target is fair game for comedy. Real sensitivity is having enough empathy to understand that what seems like an easy joke to you might be someone else's life's work. The audience began to applaud, then slowly at first, uncertain if applause was appropriate in this moment, but building to something substantial. They were applauding Kevin's stand, his refusal to be mocked, his articulation of something many of them had felt but never heard expressed. That there's a difference between humor that elevates and humor that diminishes. You walk out now. You're showing everyone you can't take a joke. Jimmy called after him, making one final desperate attempt to frame Kevin's exit as weakness rather than principle. Kevin stopped and turned around one last time, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of 4 decades of surviving Hollywood on his own terms. Jimmy, I've taken jokes for 40 years. Jokes about my choice of roles. Jokes about the films I've directed. Jokes about Waterworld. Jokes about everything I've ever risked or created or believed in. I've heard them all from people funnier and smarter than you. He pointed at Jimmy with one finger. The gesture somehow both casual and devastating. The difference between those jokes and yours. The people making them had actually accomplished something themselves. They created their own work, taken their own risks, earned the right to make fun of someone else's efforts. You haven't done any of that. You just sit behind a desk and read jokes that other people write about people who actually do things. That's not true. Jimmy started, but Kevin wasn't finished. When's the last time you put your own money into something you believed in? When's the last time you bet your house on a creative vision? When's the last time you did anything that required genuine artistic courage rather than just showing up to work and reading from a teleprompter? The silence was absolute. Jimmy had no answer because there was no answer. Kevin had just articulated a truth that couldn't be argued with, that there's a fundamental difference between people who create and people who comment, between those who risk and those who mock the risk takers. Horizon might fail, Kevin said, his voice quieter now, but carrying to every corner of the studio. It might lose money. Critics might hate it. It might be remembered as another Kevin Costner folly, another example of my supposed hubris. And you know what? I'll survive that, too, just like I survived Waterworld, and The Postman, and every other supposed failure. He looked directly into the main camera, speaking to the audience at home rather than to anyone in the studio. But at least I'll have tried. At least I'll have put something out into the world that I believed in. At least I'll have taken a swing at something meaningful instead of playing it safe. And when I'm 80 years old, looking back at my life, I'll know that I made films on my terms, that I told stories I thought needed telling, that I never let fear of failure keep me from attempting something extraordinary. Then he turned back to Jimmy one final time. Can you say the same when you're old and looking back at your career? Will you be proud that you made fun of people braver than you? Will you feel fulfilled knowing that your contribution was mocking those who actually created things? Is that the legacy you want? Jimmy's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. There was nothing he could say that wouldn't prove Kevin's point. You know what I hope? Kevin said, and there was something almost sad in his voice now alongside the anger. I hope that someday you create something, anything, something that requires genuine risk, genuine belief, genuine commitment. And when you do, when you finally understand what it's like to put yourself out there completely, I hope someone treats your effort with more respect than you've shown mine today. With that, he walked off the stage, leaving behind the studio in complete disarray. A host scrambling to justify his approach and an audience that had just witnessed something far more real than anything scripted television could produce. Jimmy tried to continue the show, tried to make light of what happened, tried to frame Kevin's exit as evidence of thin skin or inability to handle the rough and tumble of late-night comedy. But every word he spoke just reinforced what Kevin had said, that he fundamentally didn't understand the difference between humor and cruelty, between commentary and mockery, between punching up and punching down. The remaining segments felt hollow, the energy having been completely destroyed by Kevin's departure. The audience seemed subdued, perhaps processing what they'd witnessed, perhaps feeling complicit in something that had crossed a line they hadn't recognized until Kevin articulated it. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation began spreading across social media. Number Kevin Costner started trending worldwide. The reactions were overwhelmingly supportive, not just from Kevin's fans, but from artists, creators, and anyone who'd ever taken a risk and been mocked for it. People who'd spent careers being told they were crazy for their ambitions saw in Kevin stand a validation of their own choices, a defense of artistic courage that rarely got articulated so clearly. Filmmakers, directors, actors, many who'd faced their own mockery for ambitious failures, posted their support. Kevin Costner just reminded everyone why he's one of the last real movie stars. One prominent director tweeted, "He makes films because he believes in them, clears throat, not because algorithms say they'll work. That takes courage that talk show hosts will never understand." Entertainment journalists analyzed the incident, with most concluding that Kevin had been completely justified and that Jimmy had badly miscalculated by thinking that Waterworld jokes were still funny or appropriate. Film critics discussed what the incident revealed about how we treat ambitious failure versus safe mediocrity, how we mock risk-takers while celebrating those who never venture beyond the comfortable. The show's ratings took an immediate hit. Publicists for other major stars began calling, reconsidering bookings, weighing whether promotional value was worth the risk of similar treatment. Several high-profile cancellations followed. The incident became a case study in how to alienate not just one guest, but an entire community of artists who'd watch one of their own get mocked for his courage. Jimmy issued a statement later that evening. Not quite an apology, more of a defensive explanation about how comedy sometimes pushes boundaries and that Kevin had misunderstood the tone, but the statement landed poorly, revealing that he still didn't grasp what he'd done wrong. Still saw the problem as Kevin's sensitivity, rather than his own cruelty. Kevin, meanwhile, continued promoting Horizon through other channels, interviews with journalists who actually wanted to discuss film appearances on shows whose hosts understood the difference between challenging questions and cheap shots. On these platforms, he was generous with his time and insights, thoughtful about his creative process, and made it clear that his walk-off wasn't about being unable to handle criticism, but about refusing to participate in his own diminishment. The film itself, the project that had sparked the whole controversy, became something more than just another movie release. It became a symbol of artistic courage, of betting on yourself, of refusing to let market forces or conventional wisdom dictate what stories get told. Whether it succeeded or failed commercially almost became secondary to what it represented. That some artists still made art for reasons beyond profit. That some stories still got told because someone believed they needed telling. The incident sparked broader conversations about how we treat ambitious failures versus safe successes, about whether we become a culture that punished risk-taking so severely that fewer people were willing to try, about whether late-night comedy had devolved into nothing but mockery, because actual wit required more effort than simply pointing at someone's failure and laughing. Some defended Jimmy, arguing that celebrities should expect to be teased, that Waterworld was fair game for jokes, that Kevin was being too sensitive. But most observers recognize something crucial, that there's a massive difference between gentle ribbing among peers and mocking someone's life's work to their face, between comedy that reveals truth and comedy that just wounds. The walk-off also highlighted something that had been building for years, established artists' increasing unwillingness to tolerate disrespect just for promotional opportunities. Kevin Costner didn't need Jimmy Kimmel. His reputation was secure. His legacy was established. He could promote his film through channels that treated him with respect and his work with seriousness. What made this incident particularly powerful was that it was Kevin Costner, someone whose track record of ambitious swings, spectacular failures, and historic successes gave him unassailable credibility to speak about artistic courage. He'd risked everything multiple times. He'd failed publicly. He'd succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. He'd lived a life that gave him authority to say what needed saying. And what he said resonated far beyond just defending Horizon or his past films. He'd articulated something that artists across mediums recognize, that creating requires courage that commentators will never possess. That ambitious failure is more valuable than safe mediocrity. That the people who mock risk-takers are almost always people who've never risked anything themselves. Kevin's walk-off became a cultural moment, not because it was dramatic or explosive, but because it was principled. He didn't storm off in anger despite the headlines. He methodically explained exactly why. He was leaving, articulated the difference between legitimate criticism and lazy mockery, and demonstrated that you can defend your dignity without losing your composure. In the weeks that followed, other artists cited Kevin's stand when setting boundaries with media, when declining to appear on shows that prioritize mockery over meaningful conversation, when insisting that their work be treated with respect, even if it wasn't commercially successful. His walk-off had given him permission to demand better. Jimmy Kimmel's show continued, but something had fundamentally changed. The incident had exposed a meanness in late-night comedy that many had noticed, but few had named so clearly. And while the show's core audience might still tune in, the artistic community had learned a valuable lesson. Treat creators with respect, honor their courage even when they fail, or prepare to watch them walk away while audiences applaud their exit. And Kevin Costner. He went back to being Kevin Costner, making films on his terms, taking risks that others wouldn't, telling stories he believed in regardless of what market research said. The walk-off became another chapter in his legend, another example of why he'd remain one of the last real movie stars, not because he always succeeded, but because he never stopped trying, never compromised his vision, and never let anyone convince him that artistic courage was something to be ashamed of. Because the secret to Kevin's longevity wasn't avoiding failure. He'd failed spectacularly multiple times. It was understanding that the only real failure is not trying at all. That mockery from the risk-averse is a badge of honor rather than shame. And that some things, artistic integrity, creative vision, genuine courage matter more than the approval of people who've never created anything worth mocking in the first place. Jimmy Kimmel had wanted viral content from Kevin Costner. He'd gotten it, just not the kind he'd hoped for. Instead of clips of Kevin laughing along with jokes about his failures, the internet had been flooded with clips of an artist defending artistic courage, an audience supporting that defense, and a host learning the hard way that some targets aren't targets at all. They're people whose work you should feel honored to discuss, whose courage you should celebrate rather than mock, whose presence on your show is a gift you just squander for the cheapest possible laughs.